There are 5 types of people who own McDonald's restaurants. One of them started with a single store in the 1950s and quietly became a millionaire before McDonald's was even famous. One of them is currently broke, in debt, and legally not allowed to call himself an owner yet. One of them owns 40 restaurants and has never flipped a single burger, and one of them isn't a person at all. It's a hedge fund. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how much each of these 5 tiers actually makes, how much it costs to enter each one, and which tier McDonald's itself is quietly trying to make disappear. Here's what almost nobody understands about McDonald's: the company barely sells burgers anymore. It sells real estate and franchise fees, and the actual restaurants are run by 5 completely different tiers of owner, each with a different amount of money, risk, and power. There's the legacy founder, the broke first-timer, the multi-unit grinder, the regional mogul, and the corporate investor. Let's go through all 5, starting with the one who got in before anyone knew this business would work. In 1955, a milkshake machine salesman named Ray Kroc opened his first McDonald's franchise, Plains, Illinois. At the time, nobody believed fast food would become a $1 trillion global industry. It looked like a regional burger stand with a gimmick. The earliest franchisees who signed on in the late 1950s and 1960s paid a few $1,000s for the rights to a single restaurant, at a time when the entire concept could have failed within a year. Here's the part most people miss. Those early franchisees weren't just buying a burger stand. They were buying into a real estate strategy nobody else understood yet. McDonald's, under a finance executive named Harry Sonneborn, realized the real money wasn't in selling burgers. It was in owning the land underneath the restaurants and charging franchisees rent on top of their franchise fees. The legacy founders who got in early rode that land value up for 60 years. A single restaurant location bought for a few $1,000s in 1962 might now sit on land worth millions, and many of these founding families still control multiple restaurants passed down for 3 generations. This tier is functionally closed. You cannot become a legacy founder today. You can only be born into one or acquire a restaurant from one. But understanding this tier explains the entire skeleton of every tier that follows. McDonald's business model was never really about burgers. It was about real estate and recurring fees, and everyone who buys in after this point is playing that same game, just at a much higher price. Today, becoming a McDonald's franchisee is one of the most expensive entry points in the entire fast food industry. McDonald's requires a minimum of $500,000 in non-borrowed personal liquid capital just to apply, meaning cash you actually have, not money you're planning to borrow. Total investment for a single restaurant runs anywhere from $1.3 million to $2.3 million once you include the initial franchise fee, equipment, signage, and construction. Here's the part that surprises people. Most of that money isn't even profit-generating yet. It's just the entry ticket. On top of the upfront cost, franchisees pay McDonald's an ongoing royalty of 4% of gross sales, plus rent that typically runs another 8.5% of sales, since McDonald's owns the land and building in the vast majority of cases and leases it back to the franchisee. Before a first-timer has paid a single employee or bought a single potato, roughly 12.5% of every dollar that walks through the door already belongs to corporate. This is why the first-timer tier is the riskiest in the entire system. A single restaurant generates average annual sales of around $3.6 million. But after food costs, labor, rent, and royalties, a franchisee's actual profit margin often sits in the range of 6 to 10%. That means a first-timer who invested $1.8 million might be clearing somewhere between $200,000 and $350,000 a year. Good money, but it can take 5 to 8 years just to pay back the initial investment, assuming nothing goes wrong. And plenty goes wrong. Labor cost spikes, a bad location, or a slow first year can turn this into a decade-long grind before the owner sees real personal profit. Here's the twist. McDonald's actually prefers you to fail at staying small. The entire system is engineered to push successful owners into the next tier, whether they plan to or not. Once a franchisee proves they can run one restaurant profitably, McDonald's actively encourages and often requires expansion. This is the multi-unit grinder, an owner who operates anywhere from 3 to 15 restaurants, usually clustered in one metro region so they can share staff, supply routes, and management between locations. The math here starts to shift in the owner's favor. Running multiple restaurants means spreading fixed costs like regional management, accounting, and training across more locations, which slowly pushes margins from that painful 6 to 10% range at Tier 2 up toward 10 to 15%. A grinder running 8 restaurants generating $3.6 million each in sales is overseeing roughly $28 million in annual revenue, translating to a personal profit somewhere in the $2 to $4 million range once everything is accounted for. But this tier has a brutal reputation inside the industry. The owner rarely works inside a single restaurant anymore, and instead spends their life driving between locations, managing managers, and fighting labor shortages across an entire portfolio. It's less owning a burger joint and more running a small regional logistics company that happens to sell fries. Many grinders describe this as the hardest tier to survive, not because the money is bad, but because it's the first tier where the owner has fully lost the ability to fix a problem personally by just showing up and working the register. Above the grinder sits the regional mogul, an owner or family controlling 20, 30, sometimes over 40 restaurants across an entire state or metro area. At this scale, the owner isn't managing restaurants at all anymore. They're managing an executive team that manages restaurants. This is where McDonald's franchising starts to resemble a completely different business. A mogul controlling 40 locations at $3.6 million average sales each is sitting on top of roughly $144 million in annual system-wide revenue. Even at a conservative 12% net margin, that's over $17 million a year in profit flowing to a single ownership group. Some of America's largest McDonald's franchisees, operating regional empires across multiple states, generate revenues that rival mid-sized public companies. Despite most customers having no idea a single family or investment group owns dozens of the locations they visit every week. The regional mogul's real skill isn't cooking or customer service. It's real estate negotiation, workforce management at scale, and relationship management with corporate McDonald's, since at this size, the franchisee often has direct influence over regional marketing, pricing tests, and menu rollouts before they hit the rest of the country. This tier represents the ceiling of what an individual or family can realistically control before institutional capital gets involved. And then there's the newest, strangest tier, the corporate investor, private equity firms and investment groups that don't run restaurants at all. They acquire large franchise portfolios purely as financial assets, the same way they might buy an apartment complex or a shopping mall. Here's what makes this tier different from every other one. The corporate investor doesn't care about burgers, brand loyalty, or the McDonald's experience. They care about EBITDA, cash flow multiples, and exit timelines. A private equity group might acquire a 60-restaurant portfolio, install professional management to optimize costs and margins over 3 to 5 years, then sell the entire portfolio to another investment group at a higher valuation, extracting profit not from selling more Big Macs, but from making the existing business marginally more efficient on paper. This tier represents where franchising is quietly heading. As franchise costs keep climbing past $2 million per restaurant, fewer individual operators can afford to enter at Tier 2 at all, which pushes more of the system toward institutional ownership. The upside is efficiency and stability. The downside, the thing long-time franchisees worry about most, is that a business built for 60 years on individual entrepreneurs sweating over a single restaurant is slowly turning into a portfolio line item for people who have never once worked a lunch rush. So let's grade all 5. The legacy founder an A+, but the tier is closed. You can't buy your way in anymore. The broke first-timer, a C, highest risk, highest debt, and years before real profit. The multi-unit grinder, a B, real money, but the hardest lifestyle of any tier. The regional mogul, an A, serious wealth, but it takes decades to reach. The corporate investor, a B+, low personal risk, big profit, but zero connection to the actual business. 5 tiers, 5 completely different businesses, all hiding behind the same golden arches. So which tier would you actually want to build? Grind your way up from one restaurant, or skip straight to buying the whole portfolio? Let me know in the comments. And if you want the next empire broken down tier by tier, subscribe to Cold Doc Explain.